He had been exploring forests for most of his life. The feeling of stepping into a place that few people had ever seen was like nothing else. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, every broken branch under his boots made him feel alive. This forest was different, though. It was older than most, dense and quiet in a way that made him feel both excited and uneasy. Rumors had swirled for years about strange things hidden deep inside, things that defied explanation. Most people laughed them off, but he had learned long ago that sometimes stories that sound impossible have a grain of truth hidden inside. The sun was low, painting the trees with a golden light that made the forest almost magical. Birds chirped in the distance, though their songs seemed softer here, like the forest was holding its breath. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and checked his map, although he knew he was mostly going by instinct. The narrow path he was following had faded into the undergrowth years ago, and he had to push branches and brush aside thick ferns just to make progress. Every step deeper into the forest was a challenge, but it was a challenge he welcomed. As he walked, he remembered stories the locals had told him when he passed through the small town at the edge of the forest. People spoke of things that didn't belong, of objects that appeared where they shouldn't, of shadows moving when no one was there. He had laughed at some of the tales, shaken his head at others. But there was one story that lingered in his mind, the one about a large vessel, a cruise ship that had vanished decades ago, supposedly lost at sea. No wreckage had ever been found. Some claimed it had sunk during a storm, while others whispered about more mysterious explanations. At the time, he had thought it was just a legend. But now, standing among the twisting roots and thick trees, he wondered if there was some truth to it after all. He had been walking for hours, careful not to disturb anything, keeping his senses alert. The forest had a way of making you feel small, almost like it was alive and watching. Every once in a while he would stop to listen, to watch the shadows dance across the moss-covered trunks. Then out of nowhere he noticed something strange. A glint of metal peeked through the trees. At first he thought it was a trick of the sunlight, but the shimmer remained subtle but persistent, catching his eye every time he moved. Curiosity pushed him forward. He followed the glint, stepping over fallen logs and navigating through patches of thorny underbrush. The forest seemed to grow denser, the light dimmer and the sounds quieter as he approached. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. There was a tension in the air that made his heart beat faster. Whatever lay ahead, it was not ordinary. Then he saw it. It was unlike anything he had ever imagined. A massive shape loomed between the trees. At first he couldn't believe his eyes. It didn't make sense. It was a ship, a full-sized cruise ship, sitting in the middle of the forest as if it had always been there. The sheer size of it made him stumble back a step. Its hull was streaked with rust and vines crept up its sides, wrapping around railings and climbing toward the deck. Moss covered parts of the surface and small plants sprouted from cracks in the metal. The trees around it had grown tall, almost reaching the top deck, making the vessel look like part of the forest itself. He stood frozen, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. How could a ship, designed to sail the open ocean, end up here? It was impossible, and yet it was real. He felt a mix of awe and disbelief. He reached for his camera and snapped a few pictures, not fully trusting his own memory to hold this moment. The sound of the shutter seemed loud in the quiet forest, like a reminder that he was awake, that this was really happening. Stepping closer, he noticed more details. Lifeboats were still attached, dangling precariously over the sides. The ship's name, though faded, was barely visible on the stern. He could see broken windows, the remnants of railings, and even the rusted outlines of what must have once been the ship's lounge area. It was clear no one had been here recently, yet the forest had not completely claimed it. It was a strange mix of decay and preservation, a frozen moment in time. He felt a pull to explore, a need to understand how such a thing could exist here. With careful steps, he made his way to a side entrance, ducking under a low-hanging branch. The door was slightly open, squeaking faintly as he pushed it wider. Inside, the air smelled musty, a mix of damp wood, rusting metal, and something he couldn't identify. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, creating patterns of light and shadow across the floor. The ship was empty, yet it felt as if it still held memories, echoes of the people who had once walked its decks. His eyes wandered to a small table, where papers were scattered across the surface. He picked up one, wiping off layers of dust. It was a journal entry written in a careful hand, describing daily routines on the ship. There were references to destinations, meals, and weather at sea. The handwriting was old, faded, but legible. Another note mentioned crew members and passengers, though their names had long since blurred. He couldn't help but feel a connection to the people who had once been here, imagining their lives, their laughter, and perhaps their fear as the ship met its mysterious fate. Every corner he turned revealed more. The walls were lined with portholes, most cracked, some broken entirely. The main hallway was long and silent, with signs of decay slowly spreading. He could hear the faint scurrying of animals somewhere deep inside, though nothing appeared. Somewhere above, a crow cawed, startling him. It was as if the forest itself had grown curious about his presence. He paused in the main lounge, taking in the vast space. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, tarnished but still elegant. The furniture was overturned, cushions torn and weathered. The carpet, patterned in rich reds and blues, was faded and worn, yet still beautiful. It struck him that this ship, built for luxury and pleasure, had become a monument to mystery. Nature had claimed it, yet not completely. It was trapped in time, a bridge between human invention and the wild, relentless forest. His mind raced with questions. How had it come here? Why had no one found it before? The local stories, the whispers of the ship lost at sea, they suddenly made a strange kind of sense. Maybe the tales were true and this was the proof. Or maybe something far stranger had occurred, something he didn't yet understand. He felt a thrill at the thought of uncovering secrets no one had seen for decades. He spent hours documenting everything, taking notes, sketches, and photographs. Every detail mattered, from the scratches on the walls to the small plants growing inside. He made careful observations, noting how the forest had interacted with the ship. Vines had wrapped around railings like protective arms, while moss softened the sharp edges of rusted metal. He realized this ship was no longer just a vessel. It was a home for the forest, a strange harmony between human creation and nature's relentless growth. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the decks, he stepped outside for a moment of clarity. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth. He looked at the ship from a distance, marveling at its size and the impossibility of its location. He felt a sense of awe mixed with responsibility. This discovery was remarkable, but it was fragile. One wrong step could damage evidence, or worse, put him in danger. Night approached quickly in the forest, and he knew he had to make a choice. Stay here and explore further, risking the darkness and unknown dangers, or return to camp, process what he had seen, and plan a careful return. The forest whispered around him as if urging patience. He decided to retreat for now, but not without one last look at the ship. It was as if it waited for him, silent yet alive, a secret patiently waiting to reveal itself. Back at his small tent near the forest's edge, he couldn't sleep. Images of the ship filled his mind. The rusted decks, the journals, the strange balance of decay and life. He replayed every detail, questioning every possibility. No map, no guide, no story could have prepared him for this. Yet he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The forest had shared a secret, but it had not given away all its answers. Tomorrow he would return, and this time he would explore deeper, search harder, and perhaps discover the truth behind the cruise ship lost in the woods. He drifted off to sleep with the distant sound of the forest around him, imagining the ship hidden among the trees, waiting silently for its story to be told. The adventure had only just begun, and he knew that what lay ahead would challenge everything he thought he understood about the world. The next morning he woke before dawn, his mind still buzzing with thoughts of the ship. Sleep had been restless, filled with strange dreams of vast decks overrun with green and shadows moving where they shouldn't. He dressed quickly, packed his equipment, and made his way back into the forest, determined to explore the ship more thoroughly. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The sun had not yet broken fully over the horizon, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. As he walked, he could feel the anticipation building with every step. The path he had taken the day before seemed narrower now, branches and roots reaching out like fingers. He paused occasionally, listening to the rustle of leaves or the distant calls of birds. The forest was alive but not threatening, at least not yet. It had a way of making him feel small, and at the same time more awake than he had ever felt anywhere else. When he reached the clearing where the ship lay, his breath caught in his throat again. Even in daylight, the sight was overwhelming. The massive hull loomed like a forgotten monument, surrounded by trees that had grown tall around it. The deck was dappled with sunlight filtering through the leaves, highlighting the rust and decay in a way that made it almost beautiful. He took a slow, careful step forward, feeling the weight of the discovery pressing on him. He approached the ship cautiously, aware that one wrong step could be dangerous. The ground around the hull was uneven, littered with fallen branches, leaves, and small stones. As he drew closer, he noticed the lifeboats more clearly. Some were cracked, others had partially collapsed under their own weight. Vines had wrapped around them, pulling them closer to the forest floor. It was impossible not to wonder how a vessel so large and made for the sea had ended up in the middle of the woods. The question pressed on him like a weight, heavy and insistent. Finally, he reached the side entrance again. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was just as he remembered, yet different in subtle ways now that he had more time to observe. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the walls, illuminating the dust particles that floated lazily in the air. The sound of his boots echoed, reminding him that he was the only living human here. For a moment he stood still, taking it all in. This was a place frozen in time, a place that seemed to exist between worlds. He decided to start his exploration on the main deck. The wooden floorboards creaked under his weight, and he moved carefully, trying not to disturb anything unnecessarily. The deck was overgrown with small plants that had taken root in cracks in the wood. Moss covered parts of the railing, softening the edges. He noticed small animals scurrying away, squirrels, birds, and insects that had made this place their home. He had expected emptiness, but life had adapted to this strange environment in ways he could never have imagined. His attention turned to the ship's bridge. He climbed the stairs carefully, each step groaning under his weight. The bridge was small but intricate, filled with instruments that had long since stopped working. Levers, dials, and switches were covered in dust, some rusted, others still gleaming faintly in the light. He ran his fingers over the controls, imagining the crew who had once stood here, steering the ship through stormy seas, guiding passengers to far-off lands. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. This place had once been full of life, full of movement, and now it was silent, waiting. He moved from room to room, documenting everything he saw. He found more journals and scattered papers, some tucked into drawers, others lying on the floor. They were written in careful, neat handwriting, describing daily life aboard the ship, the routes taken, the passengers, and the crew. One journal entry caught his attention. It mentioned a sudden, violent storm that had frightened everyone aboard. The captain had written about strange currents that seemed to carry the ship off course, currents that no one could explain. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate, as if fear had taken hold while the words were being written. He felt a chill run down his spine as he read. Could this be how the ship ended up here, far from any ocean? The thought seemed absurd, yet the evidence was undeniable. The ship was here, and it had not arrived by ordinary means. He made notes of everything, taking photographs and sketches. He wanted a detailed record, something that would allow him to study the ship from every angle. Every detail mattered. The way the forest had grown into the ship, the placement of objects, the signs of decay. It was all part of the puzzle. As he moved to the lower decks, the air grew cooler and damper. The scent of rust and mold was stronger here. The passageways were narrower, the ceilings lower. He had to duck under beams that had collapsed over time. Shadows played tricks on his eyes, making him think he saw movement where there was none. The quiet was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the ship settling or the distant scurrying of animals. He found cabins along the corridors, some still containing personal belongings. A small suitcase lay open, its contents untouched for decades. Clothing, photographs, letters, all preserved in a way that seemed impossible. He picked up a photograph of a family smiling on the deck, their joy frozen in time. He imagined the lives of these people, their hopes and dreams, and wondered what had happened to them. The thought made him feel a strange connection to the ship, as if it were more than just metal and wood, but a vessel carrying memories across time. Moving deeper into the ship, he came across the dining area. The tables were overturned, chairs broken or missing. Plates and utensils were scattered across the floor, covered in dust and leaves. He could imagine the laughter and conversation that had once filled this room, the smells of food and the clinking of glasses. Now it was silent, a ghostly reminder of life that had long since moved on. He took pictures, careful not to disturb anything more than necessary. Every detail added to the story he was beginning to piece together. Suddenly he heard a sound that made him freeze. It was faint, almost a whisper coming from somewhere below deck. He held his breath, listening intently. The scurrying of small animals could explain it, but the sound seemed different, more deliberate, almost like footsteps. He felt a surge of adrenaline, reminding him that exploration was not without risk. He gripped his flashlight and slowly made his way toward the sound, each step measured and cautious. The lower levels were darker, the light from above barely reaching them. He shone his flashlight across the walls, revealing old machinery, storage rooms, and narrow corridors. The ship seemed to stretch endlessly downward, as if hiding secrets beneath its already mysterious surface. He moved carefully, aware that the structure had weakened over time. One wrong step could cause a collapse. The sound continued intermittently, keeping him on edge, but he pressed forward, determined to understand what lay hidden. In one of the storage rooms, he found crates and containers that had once held supplies. Labels were faded, but he could make out remnants of food, tools, and other provisions. Some crates had been opened long ago, their contents scattered and partially consumed by the elements or wildlife. It was a strange mix of the ordinary and the extraordinary, everyday objects preserved in an impossible place. He took detailed notes, realizing that these items could provide clues about the last days of the ship before it disappeared. As he explored, he discovered more personal items, small trinkets, journals, and photographs. One journal belonged to a crew member who had described the daily life aboard the ship, the routines, the storms, and the occasional excitement of a new destination. Another journal contained sketches, maps, and notes about strange phenomena at sea. The entries hinted at fear, confusion, and uncertainty. The more he read, the more he felt connected to the people who had been here, imagining their lives and the challenges they faced. Hours passed without him noticing. The light outside had shifted, and shadows now fell differently across the decks. He realized that he had been exploring almost non-stop, completely absorbed in the mystery of the ship. He paused for a moment, leaning against a railing and taking a deep breath. The air was still, the silence heavy, yet comforting in a strange way. He felt a sense of awe at the resilience of the forest, the endurance of the ship, and the way time had left its mark on both. Finally, he decided to leave the lower decks and return to the main area. The sunlight had grown stronger, filtering through the trees and illuminating the ship in a new way. He stepped onto the deck, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. The forest around him seemed alive, as if it were watching, acknowledging his presence. He took one last look at the ship, realizing that it was more than just a structure. It was a story, a mystery, a living memory of the past waiting to be understood. As he walked back toward the forest's edge, he thought about what he had seen. The ship was a puzzle, a piece of history displaced and hidden. It raised questions about the past, about nature, about human endeavor. He felt a mix of excitement and responsibility, knowing that this discovery could change the way people thought about the world and the mysteries it held. The next day, the explorer did not head straight for the ship. Instead, he spent the morning in the nearby town at the edge of the forest, seeking any information that might explain the impossible sight he had discovered. The town was small and quiet, with narrow streets and weathered buildings that seemed to hold stories of their own. People moved about slowly, carrying on with their routines, yet their eyes followed him with curiosity when he asked questions about the forest and the missing ship. He began at the local library, a modest building with wooden shelves filled with old newspapers, maritime records, and town archives. Dust coated everything, but that did not deter him. He carefully flipped through pages of yellowed newspapers, scanning for any mention of a ship that had vanished years ago. His fingers trembled slightly as he uncovered an article from decades past. A cruise ship had disappeared in the middle of the ocean during a violent storm. No wreckage had ever been found. The story had made headlines at the time, sparking speculation, but over the years it had faded into obscurity. He read the article carefully, noting details about the passengers, the crew, and the ship's last known location. The descriptions matched what he had seen on the vessel in the forest. The same name, the same number of cabins, even the layout of the decks. It was impossible, and yet here it was, hundreds of miles from the ocean. He felt a chill run down his spine. Could it really be the same ship? Every logical thought told him no, but the evidence in front of him screamed otherwise. He decided to speak with the locals, hoping that someone might remember something unusual about the ship or the storm that had taken it. He approached an older man sitting on a bench near the town square. The man's skin was weathered, and his eyes held the kind of quiet knowledge that comes from a long life spent observing the world. "Do you remember a cruise ship that went missing years ago?" the explorer asked. The man's eyes widened slightly and he nodded slowly. "I remember it well. People talked about it for weeks, even months. Some said it sank in the storm. Others said it disappeared without a trace. But there were always rumors." "Strange rumors." The explorer leaned forward. "What kind of rumors?" The man hesitated, then lowered his voice. "They said the ship wasn't lost at sea, that it appeared somewhere else, somewhere it shouldn't have been. People thought it was impossible, of course, but some claimed to have seen it in forests hidden in the trees. No one believed them, but, well, maybe there was truth to it." The explorer felt a thrill of excitement mixed with unease. The man's words matched what he had seen. He asked more questions, and the older man told him stories of strange currents, of mysterious lights in the forest at night, and of people who vanished while searching for the lost ship. Some locals even claimed that the forest itself had a will, moving objects and hiding secrets from those who tried to uncover them. Armed with this information, the explorer returned to the forest, his mind racing. The ship was not just a strange phenomenon. It was a puzzle, a mystery that stretched beyond human understanding. He had to know more. He needed to uncover the truth, piece together the history of the ship, and understand how it had ended up in the middle of the woods. When he reached the clearing, the ship seemed even larger than before. The sun was higher in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the deck. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight. He felt a strange sense of connection, as if the ship were waiting for him, inviting him to uncover its secrets. He decided to explore the upper decks first. The stairs creaked under his weight, but they held firm. The open air carried the scent of moss, rust, and something he couldn't quite identify. A mixture of earth and metal that seemed unique to this place. The lifeboat swayed gently, though there was no wind. He wondered if the forest itself had moved them over time, or if some other force had acted on the ship. On the upper deck, he found the captain's cabin. The door was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open carefully. Inside, the cabin was small but organized, as if someone had left in a hurry. A desk sat against the wall, papers scattered across its surface. He picked up one of the documents and studied it. It was a logbook, detailing the ship's last voyage. The entries grew more frantic as the pages progressed, describing storms, strange currents, and navigation errors that could not be explained by natural phenomena. The handwriting was shaky in places, suggesting fear and exhaustion. One entry stood out. The captain wrote about a sudden force that carried the ship off its course, an invisible current that pushed them away from the sea. He described the crew's confusion and fear, and the passengers' panic as they realized something was terribly wrong. The last page was a single sentence, almost like a note left for anyone who might find it. "We are not lost at sea. We are elsewhere." The words sent shivers down the explorer's spine. He had seen the ship, and now he held a record that seemed to confirm it had ended up somewhere impossible. He photographed the pages carefully, making sure to capture every detail. This was evidence, proof that the ship had a story beyond what anyone could explain. Moving to the main deck, he found more signs of life that had once existed here. Personal belongings, small pieces of luggage, photographs, and journals told the story of the passengers. One journal belonged to a young woman who had described her excitement at being on a cruise, the beauty of the ocean, and the joy of meeting new people. Another belonged to a child, full of drawings of waves, birds, and sunlit skies. The explorer felt a pang of sadness as he imagined their lives interrupted by the mysterious forces that had carried the ship inland. He continued to document everything, careful not to disturb the fragile artifacts. Each object was a clue, a piece of the larger story. The forest had hidden this ship, but it had also preserved it, allowing him to uncover details that would have been lost forever if the vessel had remained at sea. He wondered how many other secrets the forest held, and how many more mysteries awaited discovery. Hours passed as he explored. The sun moved slowly across the sky, casting changing shadows on the deck. He noticed patterns in the forest surrounding the ship, the way trees had grown around the hull, the way roots had wrapped themselves around metal supports, and the way moss and vines had claimed the railings. It was as if nature itself had decided to integrate the ship into the landscape, creating a strange harmony between human creation and the wilderness. He decided to investigate the lower decks again. The narrow corridors and dim light created an eerie atmosphere. Shadows stretched along the walls, making him feel as if he were being watched. He shone his flashlight into every corner, revealing old cabins, storage rooms, and machinery that had long since stopped working. In one room, he found crates of supplies, some still partially intact. Labels were faded, but he could make out food items, tools, and other essentials. It was a strange mix of everyday objects preserved in an impossible place, each one adding to the mystery. In another cabin, he discovered a collection of letters. They were personal notes between family members and friends written with care and love. One letter described a young child's excitement for the journey, the hope of seeing new lands, and the joy of being with family. Another letter spoke of fear and uncertainty, of storms and strange occurrences at sea. The letters painted a vivid picture of the people who had lived on the ship, their hopes and fears, and the abrupt end to their journey. He felt a deep connection to these people even though he had never met them. Their words, their belongings, and their lives had survived in this forgotten place. He realized that the ship was more than a vessel. It was a vessel of memory carrying the stories of those who had been aboard it. He made detailed notes, careful to preserve every detail for later study. As the day drew to a close, he returned to the deck. The light had softened, turning the forest into a sea of gold and green. The ship seemed to glow in the fading sunlight, its rusted surfaces and moss-covered rails bathed in warm tones. He stood quietly, taking it all in. This was a place frozen in time, a monument to mystery and memory. The forest had hidden the ship, yet it had also preserved it, waiting for someone to uncover its story. He realized that the ship was only part of the story. The forest, the local legends, the people who had lived on the vessel, all of it was connected. The mystery was larger than any one element, and understanding it would require patience, observation, and care. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow he would return to explore further, to uncover more clues, and perhaps come closer to understanding the forces that had carried the ship to this impossible place. That night, back in his camp, he reviewed his notes and photographs. Every page, every image told a story of wonder, fear, and resilience. The ship was no longer just an object. It was a symbol of mystery, a puzzle that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of vast decks, rusted rails, and forests that seemed to move and breathe. He awoke in the night thinking of the ship and felt a quiet determination. The adventure was far from over. He knew that the forest held more secrets, that the ship's story was far from complete. The past, the present, and the strange forces that had brought the ship here were all intertwined. The next morning, he left the camp before the first rays of sunlight touched the forest floor. A thin mist hovered among the trees, giving the woods an ethereal quality, as if the forest itself was guarding the secrets of the ship. He moved carefully, listening to the faint sounds of birds waking, the distant creak of branches swaying in the wind, and the occasional scurrying of small animals. Each step brought him closer to the ship, yet the tension in the air made his skin prickle. As he approached the clearing, the sight of the cruise ship took his breath away once again. Even after days of studying it, the enormous vessel still seemed unreal, almost dreamlike. Its rusted sides glinted faintly in the mist, and vines and moss had crept higher, claiming even more of the structure. The ship seemed alive in a strange way, not in movement, but in the way it had merged with the forest, almost as if it were breathing with the trees around it. He decided to start with areas he had not yet explored, the hidden corners and lower compartments that might hold the most secrets. The main deck was quiet, the only sounds coming from his own footsteps and the occasional call of a distant bird. He climbed the stairs to the side passage that led to the lower storage areas, moving cautiously. The air grew cooler, heavier, and the smell of damp wood mixed with rust and soil became stronger. Shadows stretched along the walls, and he had to remind himself that he was alone. Yet every noise made him tense. The first room he entered was small and narrow, with metal shelving lining the walls. Crates and boxes lay scattered across the floor, some tipped over, others partially buried under layers of dust and debris. He shone his flashlight across the room, revealing supplies that had been left behind decades ago. Old canned goods, tools, and pieces of machinery were still there, preserved in a way that seemed impossible. He ran his fingers lightly over a crate, noting the labels, the dates, and the wear on the wood. Each detail was a piece of the story, a clue to the ship's final days. Moving deeper into the storage area, he found a section that seemed untouched by the forest. The walls were covered in faded paint, peeling in places, and the floor was mostly clear of debris. Here, he discovered a series of small lockers, each containing personal items, clothing, journals, photographs, and trinkets. One journal caught his attention. Its leather cover was cracked and the pages inside were fragile, but the handwriting was clear. The author, a crew member, described strange occurrences during the final voyage, mentioning sudden changes in direction, unusual currents, and eerie lights in the night sky. The words were unsettling, written in a tone that hinted at both fear and disbelief. He turned page after page, absorbing the story. The crew had been puzzled, afraid, and unsure how to respond to the phenomena they encountered. Some had tried to take notes, measurements, and observations, hoping to find rational explanations, but everything they recorded seemed to defy logic. As he read, he felt a strange connection to the people who had lived here, imagining their confusion and growing unease as the ship drifted into unknown territory. He photographed the pages carefully, knowing that each detail could be vital to understanding the ship's mysterious journey. He left the storage room and moved toward the lower cabins. The corridors were narrow, the ceilings low, and the air heavy with the scent of decay. Light from the upper decks barely reached here, making his flashlight essential. The floor creaked under his weight, and he had to duck under fallen beams in places. In one cabin, he found a small collection of personal items, letters, toys, and photographs. One letter described a child's excitement about seeing the ocean, and another spoke of a parent's hope for a safe and happy journey. The personal stories made the ship feel less like an object and more like a vessel, carrying countless lives and memories, frozen in time. He paused for a moment, reflecting on the human element of the discovery. Each item, each note, was a reminder that this ship had once been alive with people, laughter, and activity. Now it was silent, overgrown, and still, yet the echoes of life remained. He felt both awe and a sense of responsibility. He was not just exploring a mysterious ship. He was uncovering a story, one that had been waiting decades for someone to listen. Continuing his exploration, he reached the engine room. The space was vast and shadowed, filled with rusted machinery and thick layers of dust. Pipes and gears, once essential to the ship's operation, now sat frozen in time. He ran his hand over a valve, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. The room had an eerie quality, as if the machinery itself held memories of its past work, of engines running, and of the vibrations that once echoed throughout the hull. He carefully documented everything, noting the placement of objects, the state of decay, and any unusual markings. In a corner of the engine room, he noticed a small hatch partially covered by debris. With effort, he cleared the rubble and opened it, revealing a narrow passage leading further down. The air was cooler and damp, carrying the smell of earth mixed with rust. He hesitated, considering the risks. The passage was tight, the floor uneven, and he had no idea where it led. But curiosity and determination outweighed fear. He squeezed through the opening, flashlight in hand, ready to uncover more secrets. The passage opened into a small hidden compartment. Inside, he found crates and containers that had been untouched for decades. Among them were items that seemed out of place, a collection of maps, a few technological devices, and journals that described unusual phenomena in more detail. One entry stood out. It spoke of currents of the forest and a path the river never dared, cryptic words that hinted at forces beyond ordinary understanding. He felt a chill as he read, realizing that the ship's journey had involved something extraordinary, something no one could fully explain. He carefully photographed the journals and notes, making sure to record every detail. Each clue added to the story, painting a picture of a voyage interrupted by mysterious forces. A ship carried into a place it could never have reached by conventional means. He could almost see the crew and passengers reacting to these events, the confusion, the fear, and the desperate attempts to make sense of the impossible. Hours passed as he explored the hidden compartment and surrounding areas. The forest outside shifted with the light, shadows stretching across the decks and through broken portholes. The ship seemed to exist in a world of its own, a place removed from time and human comprehension. He felt a mix of awe and humility, aware that he was only a visitor in this strange, frozen world. As the afternoon wore on, he climbed back to the main deck, taking a moment to rest and observe. The sun was lower now, casting long golden shadows across the hull. The forest seemed to embrace the ship, trees arching overhead and roots wrapping around its edges. He realized that the vessel had become part of the landscape, integrated into the forest in a way that made it almost impossible to imagine it anywhere else. The sight was breathtaking, both beautiful and haunting. He considered the implications of what he had found. This ship was not just a lost vessel. It was a mystery that defied explanation, a story that had been preserved by time, nature, and perhaps something more. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow he would return, ready to explore the remaining areas and piece together the full story. He had to understand how the ship had come to be here, what had happened to those on board, and whether the forest itself had played a role in this strange journey. As he prepared to leave for the evening, he paused for one last look at the ship. The golden light of the setting sun highlighted the rust, the moss, and the intricate details of the vessel's decks. He felt a deep respect for what he had discovered. The ship was more than a mystery. It was a connection to the past, a monument to the lives it had carried and the forces that had shaped its journey. Back at his camp, he reviewed his notes and photographs once more. The evidence he had gathered was extraordinary, but the story was far from complete. There were still unanswered questions, hidden compartments to explore, and clues that might reveal the forces that had moved the ship into the forest. Sleep came slowly, his mind filled with images of the ship, the forest, and the people who had once called it home. He knew that the next day would bring more discoveries, perhaps even more startling revelations. The ship was a puzzle, a mystery waiting to be solved, and he was determined to uncover its secrets. The forest had revealed part of its story, but it had not given away all its answers. The explorer felt a mix of excitement and caution, aware that the journey was far from over, and that the ship held more secrets than he could imagine. As he drifted into sleep, he pictured the hidden compartments, the journals, and the cryptic notes that hinted at forces beyond understanding. He imagined the crew and passengers aboard the ship, their experiences frozen in time, waiting for someone to uncover their story. He felt a quiet determination, knowing that he would return, ready to explore further, to discover more clues, and to bring the full story of the cruise ship lost in the woods to light.